Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 70 today. And I am here with a very special guest. She's the head of the Libertarian Party National Committee. Please welcome Angela Mc Ardle. How are you doing today, Angela?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
What have you been up to today? Anything much?
Meeting with lobbyists in the state of New York to try to figure out how we can change some ballot access laws there, getting ready for election midterms, dealing with the FEC campaigns, getting ready for our upcoming quarterly meeting, trying to push out event invitations, lots of stuff. All busy.
Fair enough. How are you feeling optimistic about the midterm for the Libertarian Party? Are you feeling positive?
I'm feeling really good, especially about our Alabama candidates. So in the state of Alabama, we've got a really strong couple of candidates who might get elected at the state level. So I'm really optimistic about that. Been working with them really closely. And then we've got several local elections that look promising and some major ballot access races that are also looking good. So I think we're in good shape.
Fair enough. Who are the names in Alabama who are running?
Ruth Page Nelson is running for lieutenant governor. Jimmy Blake is running for governor, and then they've got a bunch of down ticket candidates. Jonathan Reels is running for, I believe, a state assembly seat. It's like legislation, but at the state level. There's like 30 candidates running. I can't remember everyone's names, but super excited to see how they do, and I think some of them are actually serious contenders.
They should. I think it would be good if United States, had a bit more libertarian governors, rather than conservative or Democrat, because
Yeah.
especially that time. And also, I was watching a bit of the New York governor debate, and Larry was actually streaming that, and I thought to myself, why is Larry Sharp not on there? It's just absolutely outrageous, especially with the guy, of his quality and his knowledge that he's not on there too. It's ridiculous, Angela.
Yeah, it's been really frustrating process. I mean, the National Party, at least in this term, supported him. We gave him funding, but he had to get 45,000 signatures in 6 weeks last spring, and it's crazy. Like he made, by the way, so 2 years ago he made the ballot access threshold. It was lower, so the signature requirements. He got the state of New York ballot access for the Libertarian Party, and then the government came and raised the threshold, nearly doubled it, just to keep him off the ballot. So it's been a
Wow.
real fight.
That sounds to me like they see him as a threat. Hey, well, they do that
Yep,
to most people. Hey, absolutely insane.
yep. So we've been working with a couple of state assemblymen who actually did agree that it was a terrible thing that was done, and they're Republicans. So we're aligning with them. So in Alabama, we're working more closely with people who are more politically on the left, who represent they're like former Democrats, and then in New York, we're representing working with people who are more conservative. So it's like we just got to figure out who's the best to work with in each situation in every state.
We're talking about like how they try to sabotage Larry Sharp. What
Yep.
is the dirtiest thing that like the establishment has done to you guys, to any libertarian candidate in any like election, whether it's been a national or local
Mm,
so far this year that has happened?
they challenge our signatures. So in a lot of states, you got to collect signatures. Almost every state, not every, but almost every. You got to collect signatures to get on the ballot. So California, you only need to collect like 40 signatures to get on the ballot for a congressional race. Not a big deal, right? So you want to knock doors, go to your friends. You want to turn in at least 70 just to be safe. But in some of the other states, you got to turn in a whole lot more. Like Rhode Island, it's like I don't know, like 1,000 signatures in a weekend. It's ridiculous, right? And so we get our candidates out there and our volunteers, and they really bust their chops. They're going around collecting signatures from everyone they know. They're in front of grocery stores or going door to door. They turn them in. They work really hard, and then someone from another party or a government agency comes and says, "I challenge your signatures. I think that they're all garbage. You made them up, or they're fraudulent, or they're
Oh, that's
bad."
ridiculous.
Yeah. So we've had that happen in New York. That's one of the things that kicked Larry off, because he did turn in 45,000 signatures, and then he got them challenged. And the administrative board, it's like an administrative court, it's like not a real court. They said, we don't believe that you would have collected all the signatures, so we're throwing them out. And they didn't even review them. I thought that was really low. And then we took it to a higher court.
That's very unconstitutional, that is.
Yeah, we took it to a higher court, and the higher court sided with the administrative court, and it's just a huge mess. So right now, the only shot we've got is if they take it to the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court doesn't hear every case. You know, a lot of people ask for them to hear cases, and the Supreme Court of the United States just, you know, they only pick ones that they want to hear.
The only ones that the establishment will make them pick. Angela, just so you know, your audio quality is a bit bad. Just to let you know.
Let's see what we can do.
No, your audio quality is fine. Sorry, your camera quality, it's a bit buzzy.
Oh, I don't know what's going on there.
No worries, take your time.
Let's take a look at the settings.
But yeah, I do agree with you. I do think it is absolutely outrageous, because the Supreme Court, as we all know, especially how they use Roe versus Wade, whether you're a part of that's a bit better. That's a bit better.
Great.
Whether you agree on the abortion thing, you know, or not, it's like there are also other things that, you know, that the public don't get aware of, you know, especially with the billions of dollars that's going to Ukraine.
Yep.
You know, violations. You know, it's just absolutely outrageous. What was your thoughts on Roe versus Wade, Angela? Are you for abortion or against abortion?
I mean, I'm not for abortion. I'm actually 8 months pregnant right now. You can't tell by just looking at me on the screen, but I'm super pregnant. I'm skeptical of some of the laws that have come out, or they haven't come out yet. They've been proposed in states like Texas that would basically target pregnant women when they were traveling out of state to spy on them. Make sure they weren't traveling out of state for abortion, which is really just like creepy and Orwellian. So I don't go at it as hard as a lot of pro-life people, just because I feel that there's a little bit of a moral hazard there with spying and privacy. But the National Libertarian Party took abortion out of our platform in May at our national convention, because it's just, people fight over it. And I think that people on both sides of the argument have good faith reasons, and it's just, we can't agree on it, right? So we decided as a party not to take an official position on it and let members and candidates decide how they want to campaign and how they want to talk about it. And I think that's been a good choice. I was a little nervous at first, and I think it's the right thing to do.
In the Libertarian Party, what subject do you think has been the biggest, like, one that most people are divided on and argue over in the Libertarian Party, or the Mises Coffee?
So there's abortion. That was a huge one, right? The next one is going to be immigration. And another, well, I guess there's 4. Abortion, immigration, bigotry. That was a big fight. We deleted the words, we condemn bigotry as irrational and repugnant from our platform, and everybody lost their minds over that. And secession. We added a secession plank to our platform. So those are the big controversial arguments that we have internally.
Mm-hmm. I know that a lot of libertarians, you know, like, are for open borders. A lot of them don't support the borders. What is your opinion on that?
I would love to see the borders open after we end the welfare warfare state. I think that welfare is totally untenable. I think that also, to be fair, it's overblown how much welfare aid goes to people who are here illegally. It's not as much as people think. It's a talking point, but it is an issue. Entitlement programs are an issue. People come here and they work really hard, but then you end up with all these other entitlements, just like the people who are already here have. It's just like you're just adding more and more and more. And I also think that the United States foreign policy does put us at risk of terror threats and people crossing the border. And that's our own fault. When we have a government that bombs people overseas, people rightfully get pretty upset with us, and they want to come over here and hit us back. So if we can get rid of those things, I'd I'd be totally down with open borders. But I think that's a process that needs to be undertaken in order to be responsible.
Hmm. Out of all the wars that are going on right now, whether it's the Ukrainian war or the Libya war or the Syria war, what is the one, in history, whether it's been the Afghanistan war or the Iraqi war, what has been the one that angered you the most, and one of the wars that really woke you up the most to becoming like, a so-called conspiracy theorist and really opened you up to the lies of the New World Order and the establishment and the elite and the United States government?
I think that Iraq 2.0 was probably the one that was the most red pilling for me. So I was in elementary school when Operation Desert Storm happened, when the United States sent troops over into Iraq.
What year was that again?
That was in the early 90s. Early 90s. Don't remember exactly what year it was. But yeah, that was really horrifying. And even as a small child, I remember wondering, like, what's happening? Why are we sending people over there? Didn't make a lot of sense. But I think that the war that was kicked off in about 2003, where we ended up destroying their infrastructure and set up Guantanamo Bay. This was like 1 million people died from stupid things. Like the United States military was bombing waterways, so people couldn't have clean water. People died of cholera. It's horrifying. That's got to be like, you're not killing bad guys. You're bombing people's plumbing, and then no one can have clean water to bathe in or drink. Like, that was probably the most upsetting for me, that really got me like awake to the evils of American empire. And I think the most recent one that has been so upsetting has been the war, the bombing campaign in Yemen and the starvation campaign.
Oh, it is absolutely outrageous. I watched this great interview with the American, I can't pronounce it, but the American, someone who interviewed this person who's in Yemen. And it's just criminal. And, a lot of Trump supporters will say that Trump was anti-war, but he also, helped, continue the Saudi Arabian funding of, that war on Yemen, the genocide that Obama, that Clinton, and Bush did. And it's just absolutely outrageous that this, war keeps going on. And I really do think, United States needs to stop doing that.
Yep, totally agreed. It's ridiculous. There's no reason for it. I mean, we're friends with the Saudis, even though they have all kinds of human rights violations, but we're not friends with Iran. It doesn't make any sense. Like, it's a complete mess. We should not have these entangling alliances.
And like, this also goes back to the Islamic Revolution. Before the Islamic Revolution, I was watching photos. Like, I saw photos and videos of like these countries like Yemen and Oman and like Iraq and Iran, and these countries weren't actually that bad back then. They actually had, they had people on the beaches. They had, girls not forcing to wear hijabs. It really looked like, like New Zealand or Australia, a society that was peaceful. Everybody got along, especially in Yemen too. Yemen used to be a Christian nation, but it used to have a government that was Muslim, that was Christian, and different ideologies. But then the United States came along and just ruined that. And it's the same thing in Afghanistan. Afghanistan before the 70s and the 80s, used to be very Buddhist. It used to have different, people in their government helping it out. And it's just the CIA, especially when it goes to that, there's one of the reasons why the CIA should be abolished, with all the funding that they do, with all the legal operations they make, and you probably just saw, did you see, but speaking of that, it's just, I really think that the CIA and FBI should absolutely be abolished, Angela.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you're starting to see conservatives in the United States wake up to that sentiment. Since former President Donald Trump has been targeted by the FBI, all of a sudden they realize, oh, there's so much political power that these agencies have. That's not a good idea. And it's funny, right? Because what they've been saying is, they're saying, if they can do it to the former president of the United States, they could do it to anyone. And the libertarian argument is, they have been doing it to everyone. Now they're just also doing it to the president. But I'm glad you're finally waking up to the evils of this agency.
Oh, they're absolutely evil, especially I was watching this great documentary, great interview with Oliver Stone, and he was interviewing Vladimir Putin. Now, obviously, you might have different opinions to Vladimir Putin. That's fine; doesn't bother me at all. But Vladimir Putin was talking to him about what the United States did in like Ukraine and all around the world. And there's also this other documentary that Oliver Stone did, which is called Ukraine on Fire, and it
Yeah.
exposes how what the CIA does, like, is what they did a lot in Ukraine and in Georgia and in Afghanistan and Iraq and also, Guatemala and also in a lot of, South American countries. The CIA would get, people to go in, do these military coups, and there's even a training school in the United States that does it. Do you know that?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, which
It's
is it.
related. It's well,
Yeah.
yeah, I have read a little bit. I don't know how much I should be talking about it on this podcast, but yeah, there are a couple of schools that do that.
Yeah. Oh, it
One
doesn't
of the
bother me. You can talk
yeah,
about it. I mean, I know my
I don't want to
channel's
get
been censored. My channel's been
yeah,
censored. But no, I really don't care anymore. You can
I
go
don't
ahead
want to
and.
get myself swatted. One of them is related to Blackwater, which changed their name several years ago, but they do a lot of that kind of training for people who are in the CIA, for CIA adjacent. It's private military contractors who help to engage in regime change. It's not good.
Yeah, sorry about that. Sorry if I feel like I was endangering you mentioning
No,
that.
it's okay. It's okay.
you know.
One of our guys ended up on some Ukrainian kill list recently, so I'm being cautious. It's like you never know how serious that stuff is. Is it just government propaganda that's meant to fearmonger you? Is it how I don't know. Ugh.
Yeah, it is a bit. I even heard Elon Musk got on there too. That was a bit ridiculous, wasn't it?
Ridiculous. Absolutely. He gives them Starlink. He gives them basically free internet, and but also says, hey, I think we need to try to find a way out of this war. Let's de-escalate. And they just tell him, "F you." Like, we hate you. Now we want you to die. It's such an attitude of entitlement. Like, I feel for the people who live in Ukraine who have to deal with this crap, but their government sucks. Their government is just as lousy as the United States government.
Oh, they're an absolute, bed with the elitists and the
Yeah.
establishment. So, Angela, speaking of that, tell me about your journey to libertarianism. Did you start off as a conservative, or like what was your beginning, and like what was the book that you read and philosophical belief like from any leader, like whether it was Ron Paul, that led you to libertarianism?
That's a good question. So I became a libertarian when I was a teenager, like 17. And I had a very shallow understanding of what libertarianism was. I was just like, oh, I'm a Republican who's okay with weed and gay marriage. Okay, great. Close enough. Someone said, well, you sound like a libertarian. And my response was, oh, I've heard of that. And that sounds okay. So I guess I'm that. Great. But a few years later, I read this book by G. Edward Griffin called The Creature from Jekyll Island. And that book, which is about the origin story of the Federal Reserve and the evils of central banking, just completely imploded my worldview. I was just, freaked out for a week. Oh, everything I know is a lie. The government, oh, it's all made up. Our currency is so fragile, it could collapse at any moment. So that completely traumatized me, and I started to really understand the evils of central planning. And then a few years after that, Ron Paul ran for president. And then I realized I'm not the only paranoid weirdo. There's actually a lot of people who have the same concerns. And so that's kind of like the full, how I became a libertarian. It's like the full transformation.
Have you ever met Ron Paul before?
Yeah, a couple of times, 3 times, I think. Yeah.
Was he
He's
really not? Was he a really nice guy, and did he give you a lot of insights of like what happens? Yeah, because he was a Congress member, and he just saw the corruption. Did he give you a lot of insights of how corrupt it really was?
I didn't have any really like long sit down conversations with him. I met him at a Young Americans for Liberty event in 2017. And then I met him a couple years after that at the Rumpel Institute anniversary event in DC. And I was just able to get a little bit of chit chat with him. And then again, he was at the National Libertarian Convention this past year in May. And so I was able to say hello again. But he's really an inspirational guy. And for someone who's getting on up there, he's in his 80s, like he's still really with it. He's still really
He looks
energetic.
like he's 20 years younger, you know. He
Yeah.
really, I think, is the best person to have never become president. Never.
That's a good way to put it. That's a good way to put it. I like to think that if he had gotten elected as president, he would have to operate it from like a panic room, right? Because everybody would be trying to kill him. It would be terrible.
Yeah, it would be pretty insane because he would first thing he would do would be to end the Federal Reserve, get rid of the FBI, get rid of the CIA, get rid of all the corrupt administrations and the IRS. And it's just, and you look at Donald Trump, you know, seeing Angela, when you look at Trump's legacy, right, how he said he was going to, you know, do all this, lock up Hillary, end the Federal Reserve, and this, and then all of a sudden he does it. Do you think that Trump is with the elite, or do you think he's just a puppet, just like all of them?
I think he's someone who has elite connections, but is not part of like the elite. And I think he didn't do what they wanted him to do. So he's kind of on the outs with them, if that makes sense. I feel like he has kind of no good allies at the top, whether it's good guys or bad guys. It was fascinating to watch him get elected because it made it. I was like, hey, if he can do it, a libertarian can do it, because everybody hated him, including the GOP.
Sorry, Angela, I have to interrupt you here. Your video quality is still a bit bad.
Oh, I'm not sure what's going on. I adjusted it. Let's try closing a couple of windows.
Yeah. No worries. I just don't want this to make you look bad or any like the quality of the video.
Yeah. I'm not really sure what's going on because it looks good on my end. I changed it to high definition.
Oh, so it might be my end then, eh?
It could be, but I'm not totally sure.
Do you just want to switch it to audio, if that's fine?
I can do that.
Yeah, that's a bit better.
Okay.
Sorry about that, Angela. You know, just to let you know, you're not an ugly person. You are very, very pretty. Just to let you know,
I appreciate it. Yeah, I know.
It's just the quality of the video was. I probably should have not pointed that earlier, but yeah, like you were saying about Trump.
Oh, I just think that he's just kind of like on his own, you know. I don't think he's like really a member of the elite. I think he was sort of like a fringe elite member, and when he went against Hillary Clinton, I feel like he was just cast out of their circles. And then what was left for him to do but try to surround himself with people that he thought were going to give him good advice, and he picked mostly terrible people, not all terrible, but mostly like John Bolton and a lot of people who were involved in, you know, like some horrendous foreign policy decisions in the past. So I don't know what to make of him. I think he's just sort of a one-off, you know. Like, I don't know if we're ever going to get anyone like him in politics again.
His tweets were very entertaining, though. A lot of people liked his tweets. What was your favorite tweet of Donald Trump?
Oh, my favorite one was by far when he retweeted the GIF, the wrestling GIF of him taking out CNN. That was my favorite one. Rocket Man was pretty good too. And then what was this woman's name? Mika. I can't remember her last name. It's not Kaczynski. It's something like that. He said he was so incredibly offensive to this woman. She had been going after him, you know, on social media, and he made fun of her for having a facelift and said there was blood running down her face when he saw her. It was just absolutely savage, and something that you'd think no one would ever go there, but he did, and everyone, you know, clutched their pearls and screamed at it, but she started it, right? We just have always thought it's unheard of that somebody would actually like take a swipe back, and he did. So I just really appreciate what he did for communication with the presidency, because we'll never have the same barrier to the president again. All presidents from that point on are going to be expected to engage with people on Twitter and social media, which I think is pretty wild.
That is very, very true. Mm-hmm. What do you think were the best things that Donald Trump did do, and what were the worst things that he did?
Okay, so let's see. What are some of the best things he did? Some of the worst things. Well, he deregulated a lot of industries, which I think is great. He cut through a lot of regulation, and that was really helpful. I think that he probably made some pretty good moves with North Korea, even though it was a little sketchy there at first when he and North Korean leaders were kind of going back and forth and at each other on Twitter, but it worked out just fine. I think as far as bad things go, I mean, he made a lot of campaign promises and broke a lot of them. I'm completely ambivalent about the wall. I think it's a waste of taxpayer money. The foreign policy, he didn't start any new wars. That's great, but man, is that a low bar, right? Like now we're having to celebrate when people don't go to war instead of ending wars. Not at all thrilled with the drone strikes on Syria or the drama with General Soleimani. Not thrilled.
Actually, also Ron Paul's son prevented him from actually going to war with Iran. Do you know that?
I've heard that there have been some news stories about Rand Paul having some good influence over him, which I think is great, and I think it's really short-sighted when people say, "Oh, you shouldn't talk to Trump," "Oh, you just stay away from him." It's like, no, you need to influence him as much as you can.
Mm-hmm. And also, what do you think about him like doing the lockdowns and stuff? Because I thought him doing the lockdowns was very unconstitutional. A lot of conservatives say that, it was actually Trump who didn't do the lockdowns. Well, actually, he did do the national emergency, and he was the one who did continue it.
He didn't literally lock down the states, but he certainly didn't push back against governors. He enabled things like Operation Warp Speed, the vaccine program, which really also helped to enable a lot of state, maybe not state level, but county and city level governments to enforce mandates. So he really enabled that by pushing that stuff out. We had, eviction moratorium stuff happen. I would say overall, he didn't handle it well. He could have done things a lot differently. He could have used his influence in much better ways. And it was just complete disappointment.
Yeah, he was and the fact he didn't, pardon Assange or Ombrick or Edward Snowden was just, that let a lot of people down. And I feel like that really turned a lot of people from the Conservative Party to Libertarian or a third party.
Yep. It was like everybody just felt like they'd been led on. One of the other things that he promised he would do is he said he would audit the Federal Reserve in his first 100 days. And it's things like that. That's why a lot of libertarians initially were going to support him, voted for him, and jumped on the bandwagon. But I was really skeptical. I was like, well, we'll wait and see, right? And then, of course, it didn't come true. And then 3 or 4 months in, we see drone strikes in Syria. And then most people were like, I'm out. Most of the libertarians abandoned that. Disappointing.
That is very true. So tell me about what you do as the head of the leader of the National Committee of the Libertarian Party. And what do you think has been the biggest problems of the Libertarian Party in the last decade? And what do you think needs to change in it?
Okay, so some of the things that I do now, I spend a lot of time doing legal work for the party because my background is litigation. So I do a lot of free legal work for the party, especially when it comes to ballot access and candidate issues and anything like that. So if candidate gets challenged and they need help drafting a reply, I do that. If somebody needs a review of legal documents, I do that. Cease and desist letters, I do that. I spend a lot of time with PR. I write a lot of op-eds. I had one in Newsweek recently. I send a lot of quotes to the media. I spend a lot of time meeting with staff and helping to fine-tune our processes. There's a lot of cleanup on my end because things were not managed very well over the past, I would say, honestly, I'd say 20 years. You know, no hard feelings to some of the people who came before me, but you never learn, you don't grow unless you can identify mistakes, call them out, and change them. And man, have there been quite a few mistakes.
Like, for example?
Okay, so really the thing that inspired me to run was the National Party's failure to speak out against the lockdowns. Like, that was atrocious. The National Libertarian Party did not say anything for an entire year. Nothing on social media, nothing in email, nothing to our supporters, fundraising, nothing. Not a single thing. Opportunity missed. It was so embarrassing, right? And a lot of our state parties and our county level parties, they were really awesome. So it's not like every libertarian was afraid to speak out against lockdowns. It was just national leadership was terrible at that. So we spoke out really aggressively as soon as I got in against lockdowns, mandates, anything of that sort. I think that just the technology and financial stewardship has not been managed very well. Just processes, you know, understanding how to work together towards a goal, project management. It's a lot of really kind of boring, technical, behind the scenes stuff, but it's important. It's critical to run any organization professionally, and it just hasn't been done. So I've been working really hard with my new executive director to get all that stuff taken care of. And it's a lot of work, but we're making progress, so I'm very optimistic.
Mm-hmm. Any great achievements you've done so far, you think?
Well, we had a live stream back in July with a lot of people from the Bitcoin community, and I thought that was a really good thing that we did is we've been trying to do outreach to demographics that naturally align with us. So everybody in the Bitcoin community is already really skeptical of the Federal Reserve. Great. You know, we are natural allies in that area. They hate government. They understand the evils of the Fed, central planning. So that was really cool. What else? Well, midterms are coming up, so I guess we're going to see. We were able to adopt a strategic plan. We've got a really good treasurer. I'm very, very excited about that. Working with Todd Agopian, our national treasurer, is absolutely a blessing. He understands how money works, what we need to do to fundraise, how to get the most bang for our buck, you know, how to capitalize on every dollar. Because we're a party that's supposed to be all about free markets, you know, we're supposed to embrace capitalism and innovation and industry. And I don't think that was done in the past. So we're changing that, definitely.
Talking about that, a lot of conservatives and Democrats make very stupid misconceptions. Like, when I was looking for your Twitter page the other day, I saw this tweet by one of Trump's previous advisors called Stefan Miller. He says that the Libertarian Party is for hard drugs, unlimited immigration, prosecution, no jail for predators, anarchy on the streets. When you see that, like, I thought as a libertarian myself, that was absolutely ridiculous and stupid. When you see that and stuff, what are other misconceptions that conservatives use to try, you know, argue against the Libertarian Party? And what is the dumbest misconception you've seen? And seeing that tweet, also, what was your reaction to that?
Oh, I replied to it. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I did reply to it. I mean, that pretty much sums it up. People think that we want people to do drugs, which is obviously not true. They think that everybody is for open borders. The thing about that is nobody even agrees on what open borders means. A lot of libertarians want to return to Ellis Island style immigration where, you know, you come over here and you essentially get, you know, like a brief medical checkup and make sure you're fit and you come in and you get to work. And, you know, I explain my position on immigration and some people want open borders and some people get really technical and philosophical and they want private borders. So they believe that the borders can be quote unquote opened when all of the land has been privatized, and then it's completely up to the individual who owns the land, or to leave it up to the states. I get irritated because there's obviously like a lot of diversity of thought on immigration, and that just gets glossed over. Anarchy on the streets. I mean, we're all about rules and natural hierarchy. We just don't think government should be involved. So that's like really obnoxious when people make that accusation. I mean, we're some of the most orderly, conscientious people that you'll find out there when it comes to public property and behavior, public behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And the drug thing, conservatives just, it's interesting because usually people on the left are more emotional, but conservatives definitely have their little triggers as well. And the drug war is one of them. And I certainly feel for people whose families have been impacted, like if someone died of an overdose, if someone went to jail and had their life ruined, but making drugs illegal doesn't solve the problem. Obviously, it's like, who has won the war on drugs? Drugs have won the war. So why don't we just come to terms with that and try to find a better way to approach this? Like it's a cultural issue. Like it's a values issue. It's people feeling hopeless. It's people not having job opportunities. It's destruction of the family. And it's really irritating when conservatives won't like admit that there are other failings that have caused the drug crisis. And instead they're like, just lock everyone up. Or recently Donald Trump said something at a rally where he said drug dealers should get the death penalty. That's so insane because it's like, okay, are they thinking just about like violent cartel members who cross the border and kill people and, they're bringing in tons of dirty drugs? Okay, totally sympathetic to that. But when I think about drug dealers, I'm thinking about kids in like suburban areas who are selling little bits of weed. It's like, that's insane. You want to give like some 17 or 18-year-old the death penalty because he sold his friend's weed? That's ridiculous. So yeah, a lot of misconceptions.
What is your opinion on the death penalty? Are you a fan of it or no?
I am not a fan of it because, well, let me clarify. I am not a fan of state-sanctioned death penalty. No comment on vigilantism or what you see when if you catch someone in the act, if you know what I mean. But we have had so many cases in the United States of people being sentenced the death penalty and then having their conviction completely overturned. And we've had at least 13 people who were wrongfully put to death and they were exonerated afterwards. So from my perspective, it's like we just literally can't trust the government to carry it out because they're just killing the wrong people. And that also means that somewhere some murderer is going free, which is also gross. Pretty upsetting.
Mm-hmm. So talking about that, when you look at like the criminal justice system in the United States, and also, police brutality and the drug on wars, and you also look at the movement like Back the Blue, how would you change the justice system in the United States? How would you reform the proper criminal reform? And do you think that police brutality in America is a very big problem? And what is your opinion on Back the Blue?
So I think that police brutality is a problem. I don't know how big it is, but when I've witnessed it. I have seen the police beat people down very unnecessarily. I think part of the problem is that we have militarized the police over the last 20 years, and that has fostered a certain mindset within them, and they feel like entitled to kick the crap out of people, and that's not good. I think that the homelessness crisis that the United States has had in major urban areas has exacerbated the problem. I think that they don't have conflict de-escalation training like they should. And there's so many victimless crimes that they have to enforce. It's not a good setup. At the same time, when I see Democrats, like far left Democrats, pushing to defund the police, that freaks me out just as much, because what that means is you're going to have no way to protect yourself or defend yourself, because as we've seen, vigilante justice is frowned upon, just as much as police brutality is. And if you create a vacuum when law enforcement, all that does is create an incentive for the federal government to come in, which would be awful. I don't want the feds or the UN stepping in and getting in our local business. So I think we really just need to re-examine community policing and probably have more community input. You know what I think would be really good is if we removed qualified immunity, because it's almost impossible to sue a police officer. And if you made that possible, I bet people would straighten up and fly right really quickly.
Mm-hmm. In your experience of being in politics, what is the most dodgiest police case of corruption you've seen, or someone being assaulted by a police officer?
Oh man, it's like a really long list. So in the city of Los Angeles, there are a lot of different police stations, and one is called the Rampart Division, and they have had so much corruption. It is frightening. It is freaky. They were involved in covering up for the people who murdered famous rapper Tupac Shakur. It's just absolutely nuts. Lots of kickbacks, lots of bribery going on over there with gangs and gang members, and having basically gang members on the police force. It's been an issue in the LA County Sheriff's Department as well. They have actual racist gangs in the Sheriff's Department. One of them is called the Vikings. It's not like technically white supremacist gangs. It's usually like whites and Asians versus Latinos or versus Black officers. They will send they'll send like a Latino sheriff into a Black area or into an area where there's like an active shooter, and then not send backup in and, put the guy's life at risk. It's really gross. I've seen Rampart Division threatened to kick someone's door in without a warrant in the city of Pasadena.
Which comes back to also the Breonna Taylor incident, which
Yep.
I thought for the police officers to go in there. A lot of conservatives will say, well, Breonna Taylor had it coming pretty much. But then at the same time, it violates the fourth constitution, and when you hear conservatives talk that argument, what's your opinion on that?
Oh, I think that conservatives are just totally blinded. They're just totally blinded by the dangers of the police. Now, to be fair, some of them have woken up since lockdowns, because especially in New York, the city of New York, you had police enforcing lockdowns and dragging people away violently. There was a lot of violence over non-compliance with lockdowns, people who didn't want to wear masks. But I generally think that conservatives they're just too blinded by their alliance with what they view as law and order, and they don't realize how chaotic the police can actually behave on a pretty regular basis.
Yep, that is true, especially, in 2020, when the George Floyd incident happened, I was a big Back the Blues supporter. I used to think, the cops were the good guys. And then I studied, and then the lockdowns happened in New Zealand and Australia. And then I saw the police brutality happening in Australia and in New Zealand. Well, New Zealand wasn't as bad as Australia, but in Australia and America and Britain. And it's just the outrageousness that you saw during the lockdowns. The police brutality, people getting beaten up. I mean, in Australia also you had that girl, get arrested for a social media post.
Yep.
There was one incident in Australia where this police officer banged a guy's head and he was bleeding everywhere. There was one incident in Australia where this guy was having a heart attack and the police officers were just standing there and doing nothing about it. And, it's just, and especially in America when you see a lot of that stuff happening, it's just absolutely outrageous. And I don't know how these conservatives can just sit there and watch as I understand there's good police officers, but if there are police officers doing a bad job, call them out.
Yep.
I just don't get it, Angela.
Absolutely. It's like you gotta call out your own, right? They're afraid to say that there's something wrong with their team, but how do you even improve, right? That's how they lose. That's how conservatives lose, is because they're not willing to come to terms with some of their own failures, make adjustments, and try to improve. One of the worst things that's happened with the police department in the United States in the past year was the shooting in Uvalde, Texas. So you have this guy, this psycho, go into this elementary school and shoot a bunch of kids. Schools over here, by the way, are gun-free zones. So even though Texas is a constitutional carry state, you can't take guns into schools. And there's arguments for and against that. I get it's complex, but it is what it is. So active shooter, someone calls 911 and the cops just stand outside for 45 minutes. And not only do they not go in after the guy, they block parents who are trying to go in. And a couple of parents broke through the barriers and climbed fences and ran and pulled their kids out. But there were a lot of kids who died. And it's just like, this is what did we pay you for? This is shameful. I can't imagine a more humiliating moment in a career to be the police officer who just stood there with a gun and just let someone go in and massacre a bunch of children. So I'm hoping that they'll learn from that, because that's just, it's like, what is the point? You can go and gun down homeless people, or you can kill George Floyd, kneel on his neck. Maybe it was fentanyl, maybe it was the neck kneel, I don't know. But just to let little kids die?
And just to let you know, also, there was a conservative guy that the media ignored, that he had his, do you know that? There was a white guy who had his neck kneeled on, and the police officer was just like, what was his name again?
I can't remember his name. I know who you mean, though.
Yeah, and it's just like, but at the end of the day, there was outrage over George Floyd. I mean, dude, if George Floyd was killed with his neck, rolled, I don't think it should have happened to him. I think it was disgusting, for the way for him to die. I think also the same thing goes to the white guy who had his neck kneeled on. I think if that was to happen to a Latino or Asian, it would be, disgusting. And I definitely think that policing, in America definitely is proof. How would you, Angela, when you were talking to a libertarian candidate, what do you suggest to them if they're looking for advice on how to deal with police brutality? What would be your best advice on how to fix policing in America?
End qualified immunity, and work on conflict de-escalation, and work on an end to the drug war. And that's like a policy thing, right? So police have got to work with policymakers on that. It's not just like you snap your fingers and everything's going to be okay. But it is a real issue. It is a real issue, and libertarians, they get kind of tripped up on this one, right? Because in the United States, most libertarians are so anti-police. They're very focused on fighting back against the police, calling out corruption. And then they get caught on the debate stage by the answer, well, what are you going to do to fix the problem? And they're like, I don't know. And that's obviously not a good look.
Who do you think out of all when it comes to the argument against the police, when the libertarians are speaking, what argument have you seen from any debate? Do you think from what argument have you seen from any libertarian debate? The best argument you've seen from any debate that has had to speak out against police brutality, whether it's been from a candidate, what's the best argument you've seen against it?
That's a really good question. I had to think about that. Who has done the best argument? I don't know. I think Shane Hazel had some good points. He's running for governor in Georgia. He's made a couple of good points in some of his debates. Yeah, I'd have to think about who's been the very best, because most of the best arguments I hear are not on a political debate stage. It's libertarian talking heads like Dave Smith or Tom Woods. He does a really good job of reaching out to people who are socially conservative.
Yeah, I think that is very, very true, Angela. That is. Also, Angela, so speaking about police brutality, what has been, in your opinion, the biggest cost of the war on drugs?
Oh, I think the destruction of the family unit. I think that's probably the worst thing that's come out of it. Is there have been so many parents, so many fathers specifically, who've been sent to jail, and it's broken up the family unit. And drug sales have also contributed to that. And so it's like the refusal to address the issue head on, I think, has just been absolutely devastating, especially to the urban community where there are generally more drug sales, at least on the street.
Hmm. And I think it's absolutely outrageous how there are some pedophiles who get less time than
Yeah,
fucking drug offenders. It's
yeah.
just absolutely outrageous, you know?
It's really gross. It's really gross that people can molest kids, serve a couple of years, and then get out and be on a list. But someone who sold a bag of cocaine is in jail for 20 years. That's completely disgusting and insane.
Hmm. During your time and being in, like, living in California, I know that I've seen in some videos that you're now living in Texas.
Yep.
What was the most abusive case of like someone that you knew or a friend or family member where they were targeted by police for just having weed or just having a drug that was absolutely outrageous?
Oh man. Okay, there've been several. As far as drugs, I don't know. The worst cases of police brutality that I've witnessed or come close to were not drugs. They had to do with homeless people. Um, I was down on Skid Row doing some homelessness outreach when the police came down and shot a woman in her tent, and that was really bad. That was really bad. I've also been down there when a different homeless woman was raped pretty violently, and the
By a
police
police
came.
officer?
No, but the police came down and were really cruel and dismissed her and turned her away. And I got stuck comforting her. What else? And there's just been so many bad incidents. There was a really bad incident of police brutality against the son of a police officer who was on the scene when his friend was getting arrested for DUI. And he was 18 and he just got a little too close. He just got a little too close to his friend who was getting arrested, and the police beat him so badly he ended up in the hospital. And they charged him for blood and urine in the car. They beat him like so badly he like wet his pants. You pass out, you lose control of your bodily functions. And then they found out later that his father was a police officer. That was really insane.
Did anything get done to those police officers? Did they get a
No,
charge? Did they get
no,
arrested?
no, no, no. I'm sure they got a stern talking to, but there was no administrative leave or anything like that.
Oh, they should be absolutely charged for that. That is
Yeah,
outrageous. What? So this was in California, right?
yeah, that was in California. That was in Chino or Chino Hills. Oh, another really bad one. It was in the city of Pasadena. The police kicked in a door over a dispute between some neighbors. So it's kind of complicated, but there was a person who was homeschooling their kids, and their roof collapsed. I did some of the legal work on this case. The roof collapsed. They didn't. The landlord refused to fix the roof, so they had to fix the roof. It was several $1,000s. So they went back and forth with the landlord, and they were like, "Well, we're not gonna, pay rent for 2.5 months because that's the cost of the roof per rental agreement. You take care of major damage. We pay for things like unclogging the sink, right?" So the landlord started calling the cops on them in retaliation and making stuff up about their kids. The cops came, kicked the door in, beat the father to the point that he was hospitalized, hauled the mother off to jail, did all of this in front of their small children, by the way. Most of the kids were under 10. They were a homeschool family, had more than 5 kids. And the kids ended up in the system, and that's got to be one of the most disgusting things that I've ever dealt with. And I did some parental advocacy for them in children's court to help them try to get their kids back. But it was nuts, and the judge tossed it out. But they had to sit in jail for a while until their arraignment came. So it was like this guy was like basically handcuffed to a hospital bed, and his wife, who had been breastfeeding their children, was locked up in a cell. It was quite awful.
That is absolutely terrible. I mean, it's a good thing you helped out with that. I like, wow, I'm blown away by some of the police stories that I hear coming out of America. I mean, police brutality happens everywhere in the world, but the things that happen in America, it's just like, and I remember I did a brilliant interview with these people from Against the Mod. Have you heard of a girl called Rachel Backyard? Is that her name, Rachel Backfire? She's got autism. Have you heard of her?
Oh, Rachel Blackfair, yes.
Yeah. She's got autism too. And I was talking with her, and her husband shared this brilliant story of like where he was arrested, by the police officers for just having a gun and the way he was treated. And he said that if it wasn't, and he said it was pretty much going to prison, but because of like, there was one incident where someone I think had a heart attack. And if it wasn't for someone like having that heart attack, which I mean, it's a terrible thing, don't want that to happen, he would have been sent to prison because when that case was going on where he got caught by the police for the gun, the fact that the judges gave him like reparation for fucking saving that person's life with a heart attack, but the fact that he was going to almost go to jail for this gun thing was just absolutely insanity. And
Yep.
it's just and one thing Rachel does, which is very good, she also talks about like a lot of police brutality. One thing I really love about her Twitter page is she really exposes a lot about the right wingers and stuff like that, which is, I think, is fantastic. I don't agree with everything she says, but or not just her, but also Against the Mob do a very good thing. Who else? There's a girl called there's a lot of libertarians who do a very good job at that.
Yeah, she's a very sweet person. I've met her several times.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of that, Angela, what is your opinion for the future of the Libertarian Party? Are you optimistic, and do you ever think there is going to be a chance where the Libertarian Party could win an election?
Oh, so I'm very optimistic. I think that with us taking a slightly different approach to campaigning, there is a good chance of us winning elections. So we've got over 200 people elected nationwide right now, mostly at the local level. We do have a couple of state assemblymen. Right now we're running, I think, about 625 candidates. We normally run, 800 something, which I think is too much. It's too much because it exhausts everybody. And then we don't have enough volunteers to go around, so we can't run serious campaigns. So my recommendation is for us to scale back a little bit, focus more on local elections, get elected at the local level, and you have to plan for the future, right? Like this is not something that we should be looking at in a 2-year election cycle. We need to be looking at a 10-year plan. So to that extent, I'm really optimistic because people do seem to be receptive to that idea. It's like, why don't you try getting elected to city council before you run for a state level position, and then people will take you seriously because you've already done this. So I think that there's a really good chance that we're going to start to make more progress, especially with how disenfranchised people are with the political system just in general. Like it's become such a joke, right? Like one of the big quote unquote exciting campaigns right now, exciting races, is in the state of Pennsylvania, where you have Dr. Oz, the TV personality, running against Fetterman, who's recently had a stroke and can barely string 2 words together.
Paul Vetterman. I mean, I feel sorry for him. I wish him all the best. Terrible thing, but for him to be abused like that is just disgusting.
Yeah. It is.
I mean,
It is. Like, I think his policies are terrible, but I think that the way he's being paraded around is even more terrible. It's really gross. But the silver lining to things like that, and the same with Biden, who's clearly suffering some sort of dementia, is people are starting to really see what a circus and joke it is. And so they're starting to sort of let go a little bit of their strong desire to associate with just one political party, because it's like, look, peer behind the curtain. There's nothing there. Lights are on. Nobody's home.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And, in that debate, what was the one thing that you saw? Like, what was the most like painful thing that you thought Vederman said?
Man, I can't even like articulate his sentences. It's like trying to remember it is difficult because all of his words were just so jumbled together. He was mad at Dr. Oz for saying something about housing, and he was trying to articulate how could Dr. Oz have an opinion about housing when he lives in a $10 million mansion, and he couldn't form the sentence, and it was just so sad. To be fair, Dr. Oz is coherent. He can hardly form an argument either. I mean, if there's ever been a case to just, vote libertarian because there's no one good in the race, that is definitely the case right there. I think Fetterman might still be slightly in the lead, if believe it or not. That's how bad that race is. It's pretty embarrassing.
Yeah, fair enough. Angela, how long can you keep talking for?
I'm probably good for another 5 minutes or so. It's interesting. I'm super pregnant right now, and so when I sit for too long without getting up, my feet start to swell. So I'm starting to get a little swollen.
No worries, that's all good. So I just wanted to finish off with the people when you look at America right now, and with the future of it going forward. When you look at all the people who are being very negative about America, who think that America might split or there's going to be a civil war, what advice would you give to the people who feel like giving up, whether they're libertarians, whether they're Democrats, and why do you think there's a good reason to be optimistic in the future? And what advice would you give? Like, what quote from a book or story would you give to people to never give up?
My advice would be to focus local, that the balkanization and separation that you're seeing in the United States, although it's ugly right now, it could be a really good thing long term because it means people are self-selecting, and liberty-minded people are going to go and be with like-minded people. And that's a really good thing. And if I was going to tell anybody anything inspirational, I think probably one of the most encouraging things that I've read was a story that has been relayed. It's been related to Ron Paul's race, and it's in the Bible in the book of Isaiah. Isaiah the prophet was, talking with God, and God said, "Okay, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to go into the city, and I want you to preach to these people and tell them all the things that they're doing wrong. And you're going to wake them up, and I just want you to put the fear of God in them and tell them, you got to change your ways. If you don't do this, that, and the other, it's doom and gloom. It's the end of the world for you." And so Isaiah says, "Okay," and then God says, "But just keep in mind they're going to ignore you. They're not going to listen to you. They're going to ridicule you. You're going to be laughed out of town, and they're going to hate you." And the prophet Isaiah says, "Okay, well that sounds terrible. God, why do you want me to go and do a failing mission?" And God says, "Well, because it's not really about them. There's all these other people out there who are scattered called the remnant. And those are the people that the message is for. So the masses may hate you, but your job is to go out and gather the remnant and the good people and bring them together. Because when everything else burns down and the whole world goes to hell, this small remnant of people is going to build everything back up. And these are going to be the people that save the goodness in civilization." And I think that's the role of libertarians today. It doesn't matter that we're the minority. We need to do the good work behind the scenes, encourage each other, and build one another up. Because if the shit does hit the fan, we're going to be the ones who are sane enough and courageous enough to hold it together.
Well, that is a great quote, Angela. I really find that inspirational. I just want to say, before we finish, where can people find you, Angela?
So you can find me on Twitter at Angela4LNC Chair. If you're curious to read my writings and see what I'm up to in the party, you can go to patreon.com/Angela Mc Ardle. I'm also on Locals and Substack.
Thank you for coming on my show, Angela. I wish you the best of luck with the Libertarian Party. And I just want to say to everybody, thank you for joining the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 70. Take care. God bless you all. Have a